Hello there, welcome to the channel. This is Nerdworld, and today's Warrior Races episode is on the Klingons. The one I've really been waiting to do. The Klingons are probably the most famous warrior species in all of science fiction media. Obviously starting out in the 1960s on Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek as one of its main antagonists, they've grown into a beloved fan favourite over the years, but who exactly are they, and what are they, and why do they fight so much? Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, tell me all the things you love and hate about the Klingons in your favourite Star Trek franchise. Before we just get started, I'd just like to point out that this video is sponsored by my sponsor, Relentless Rebels, and they are linked in the description below. Follow the link, check out their website, see if there's anything that you like. They do specialise in Viking style jewellery, which is kind of something I think a Klingon would approve of. If you find anything, use the promo code NERD20 at checkout to get yourself 20% discount, and with that said, let's get straight into this video. The Klingons, or the Klingon Empire, are a species of humanoid aliens that herald from the planet of Kronos. This is located in the Beta Quadrant of the Milky Way galaxy. The Klingons are an extremely violent and warlike people. Although there is more depth and subtlety to their culture, the general alien perception of them is that they are all a race of warriors. And although it's not that clear cut, the Klingons do have a very feudalistic and martial culture that even amongst their society, those who choose to be doctors and teachers and other such less militaristic professions still have a code of honor and conduct that dictates their every waking moment. Their ritualized ceremonies, their ritualized rites of passage, they have events that take place throughout their entire lives, different rituals that signify their entry into adulthood. There are rituals around mating. For example, slapping someone with the back of your hand, you are technically challenging them to a fight to the death. If you punch a woman or she punches you, you are initiating a mating ritual. If you reject it, you are actually again involved in a fight to the death. It's surprising how many things in Klingon culture result in a fight to the death. The Klingons, as I said, are quite a feudalistic people. Their ancestors, of which there is a long and rich military history to them, as well as a deeply spiritual one, the Klingons have a long recorded history. Now, back in their ancient times, when, like Earth, they were a divided people with different factions and states playing for power in their world, many different city-states, one man would rise up, Kahless, the Undying. Kahless was a great leader and a philosophical giant within Klingon society. He laid the foundations for their modern culture, although it's not fair to say that he probably created it, but he wrote the book on what is the modern Klingon culture. He was one of their greatest generals and war leaders. He also was instrumental in as I say, the founding of what the Klingons consider to be their current culture. The Klingons have an inherent xenophobia towards other alien species. Whether they realize it or not, this fear and xenophobia of other races persists to their core and makes them more aggressive towards other species. They only respect strength. The so-called Vulcan hello, as it's sometimes referred to in the Federation, where an enemy opens fire on the Klingons first, and as a result they take that as a sign of respect rather than a sign that you are necessarily an enemy. Now, they'll probably fire back, but the point is they'll respect you a lot more and see you less as a Patak and more as a equal. Whereas they often see Starfleet as weak because Starfleet tries to negotiate and use words as weapons, which is not something the Klingons are noted for being particularly skillful for, except for, of course, certain eloquent individuals such as General Chang and Chancellor Gorkon, two of the finest Klingons who ever lived. I'm on a hill, gonna die there, it's true. Now, as I said, the Klingons, this fear of the outsider comes from the ancient aliens that invaded the Klingon homeworld. The Klingons referred to as the Hurk. The Hurk, which basically means outsiders, they don't know their real name, although they may have heralded from the Gamma Quadrant originally. This species came to Kronos and stripped it of resources, killed and butchered its people until the Klingons rose up against them and pushed them off-world. Now, there's probably more to it than that, but the Klingons also have legends about how they believed that their gods were more trouble than they were worth, and they killed them all. These two events could be linked, but that's hearsay and speculation. The Klingons ultimately, by the 22nd century, as they begin to expand their borders into the territorial interests of other major Alpha Quadrant powers such as the Vulcans, the humans, and the Andorians, have already become a deeply spiritual and ritualistic warrior martial culture with a deep sense of honour and their own sense of right from wrong and what is justice. And what is justice is usually what's good for the Klingons. The older traditions heralded the warrior caste of Klingon society ran things and were basically the ones in charge. The Klingons were divided into sort of ruling houses that made up a form of local government known as the Klingon High Council, with each representative on the council being a representative of one of the different major ruling houses, who would eventually appoint one as Chancellor. Now this, by the 23rd century, had devolved into a less coherent society. Some of these different houses built ships of their own. Not only did they have their own glyphs and markings rather than a single Klingon imperial symbol, the Burning Heart, each house had their own symbol. They even built their own ships. It wasn't until they unified and got together that they built the first joint collaborated design from each of the different houses, unifying finally, the Klingon society into one cohesive military force. Now, it's true that the ruling houses would always be at each other's throats and always be trying to kill each other, but that's sort of power for the cause with being a Klingon. They don't just fight others. It's not just about being a united people and always the alien is the enemy. There are other enemies within your own people, someone that has wronged you, a house that is your enemy, one of your own species can be just as much of a threat, and you have to be strong even amongst other Klingons in order to survive. This breeds stronger Klingons but also roots out the weak and keeps the strong at the top. As I said, factions of the different houses would unify and build the D7 battlecruiser as the first true Klingon Imperial warship, which would be a great threat to the Federation. But, all that said, the Klingons had many other ships and weapons at their disposal that had always been very effective. The most infamous and famous is probably the Klingon Bird of Prey, which would re-evolve in different designs over time and keep reappearing until eventually settling on a basic configuration where it had posable wings and wingtip mounted disruptors, as well as a forward, usually torpedo launcher, although this was variable of what kind of weapon it could be mounted in the nose, as well as any other auxiliary weapons that may be on the craft. These ships would also become infamous for their use of cloaking devices and sort of swarm attack tactics to their enemies. These were fine ships, although they lacked really good armour. They were fast, they were nimble, and had good shields and decent enough weaponry, especially their main disruptor cannons, which were disproportionately large considering the size of the quite small ships. Now, these reflected the belligerence of Klingon culture. Everything about them. The Klingons wore body armour, although it wasn't overly effective. They wore armour that did give them some measure of protection against their enemies in the elements. They were also prone to favour bat'leths and swords and other types of handheld bladed weapons in close quarter combat, in opposed to disruptors and other ranged weapons. Although these were readily available and Klingon soldiers would normally carry them, it was less common for Klingon troops to carry large assault rifles than it was for them to carry a small sidearm and a bat'leth. This is because the Klingon sense of honour basically dictated it's more noble to fight up close and personal with your enemy rather than simply run away from them and shoot them at a distance. They also don't like shooting an enemy in the back and generally don't like to attack the weak, but that's in principle. The Klingons will violate this, as Worf often noted, as the Klingon Empire got older. Same with Martok, he also observed that the younger generations were more interested in victory, any victory, rather than an honourable victory. The Duras family, one of the greatest powers of the Klingon Empire, one of its greatest houses, was known for its corruption and double dealings with their enemies, their sworn blood enemies, the Romulan Star Empire, as well as issues with other powers and belligerence with the Federation, humanity in general. And the Duras family, from the outset, upon first contact with humans pretty much, had an issue with how humanity and the Federation later would conduct itself in its dealings with the Federation. And they wanted absolute power. They wanted to be on the throne, so to speak, of the Klingon Empire, and were pretty much willing to do anything it took to get there. This legacy of a sort of dishonourable, treacherous nature seemed to be passed on from father to son to daughter to child or whatever throughout the generations until the last known members of the Duras family, the sisters Lursa and Betor, were destroyed at Viridia by the USS Enterprise D. Although they did have a brother, he was likely imprisoned within the Klingon Empire and would never really rise to the main kind of power that his sisters and other members of his house had once held. The Klingons, as I said, do prefer close-in fighting in opposed to ranged attack, and this is summarized, is also, should I say, reflected in their battle tactics in space, whereas Klingon ships will get in really close to their targets and fire at point-blank range. They get in close and they maneuver close to the enemy, making it difficult for the enemy to hit them, while their pulsed rapid-fire weapons make short work of most enemies. This tactic, particularly using their smaller assault vessels like the birds of prey, as the Klingons, despite their ability to produce much larger and more powerful ships, most captains and crews will favour the bird of prey for its maneuverability, versatility, and just sheer resilience as a small vessel. It also means you're less technically reliant on a large crew and huger resources to field and maintain a bigger ship. There's more room for glory aboard a bird of prey, and the Klingons are all about the glory. As some would say, the Klingons have a very, very over-the-top culture and personality. They don't do anything small. There's great redundancy in Klingon culture. But the Klingons also like to drink. The blood wine is one of their favourite, although they will be partial to other types of beverages, such as root beer. Now, Klingons consider these to be warriors' drinks, and when intoxicated, well, should I say, even when intoxicated, Klingons are considered amongst the greatest warriors in the galaxy, because their coordination and physical resilience, plus combined with their sheer physical strength, makes a Klingon a dangerous enemy, no matter what the circumstances are. During times of war, as well as it is often traditional for Klingons to shave their heads during times of war to mark that they are currently in a state of hostility or war. They've also been prone to sharpening their teeth before going into battle, in order to give them one last weapon if necessary. Klingons are known to sort of get blood rage behind them when they get into a fight, and they are almost savage in their tactics. So, there we have possibly the best, greatest warrior race in sci-fi. Fight me. They are. Now, there is so much more richness to Klingon culture, but it's more than I can even conceivably go into in just one video, every facet and detail of all the rituals and traditions. Let's just say, the Klingons know how to have a good time, and they know how to hurt you at the same time. Ruthless, brutal, but also noble and honourable, as typified by individuals like Worf and Martok and Gowron, maybe not Gowron, Gorkon should I say, who displayed a certain level of honour and tolerance towards other races that some others of their kind didn't. But anyway, with that said, we're at the end of the video. Please like, share, subscribe, comment down below if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to check out my great sponsor, Relentless Rebels, and use the promo code NERD20 all in capitals if you do decide to buy anything. With that said, bye bye.